until I'd saved up my first guinea. "A man what's got a guinea's got security," Mr. Salmon once told me. Although Mr. Salmon had told me that we'd declared war against the Germans almost a year ago, we only found out how serious it was when a lot of young lads who'd worked in the market began to disappear off to the front. And on a Saturday morning there were often more lads down the East End dressed in khaki than in civvies. My old man occasionally joined us on a Saturday morning, but only to get some cash off Grandpa so that he could go to the Black Bull. Then one Saturday morning a toffee-nosed lady strode over to our barrow and placed a white feather in Dad's lapel, calling him coward to his face. When I woke the next morning, his side of the bed hadn't been slept in, and it was to be over a month before Dad turned up again, dressed from head to toe in khaki. He'd signed up with the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Fusiliers. I was so proud that for the rest of the day I just strutted around the market by his side and promised him that if the Germans hadn't been sent packing by Christmas, I would leave the market and join up myself to help him finish off the job. The next morning he left us to rejoin his regiment, even before Grandpa and I started out for the market. Christmas Day was fairly quiet that year, on account of the fact that the old man hadn't returned from the front, as the officer who'd recruited him had promised. Sal, who was working in a cafe on the commercial road, went back to work on Boxing Day, and Grace remained on duty at the London hospital throughout the so-called holiday, while Kitty mooched around checking on everyone else's presents before going back to bed. Kitty never seemed to be able to hold down a job for more than a week at a time, but she had a string of boyfriends who seemed quite willing to spend their last penny on her before going off to the front. I was 16, without a care in the world, and my only thoughts at that time were on how soon I could get hold of my own barrow. Mr. Salmon told me that he'd heard the best barrows were being sold off in the Old Kent Road, on account of the fact that so many young lads were joining up to fight for king and country. The following Saturday morning, I asked Grandpa for a couple of hours off. "Oh, found yourself a girl, have you? I only hope it's not the boozer." "Neither," I told him with a grin. "But you'll be the first to find out, Grandpa, I promise you." I crossed the Thames at Tower Bridge, and when I arrived at the rival market, I couldn't believe my eyes. I'd never seen so many barrows, long ones, short ones, stubby ones, in all the colours of the rainbow. But the only one I kept coming back to had displayed in blue on gold down its sides, "The biggest barrow in the world." The woman who was selling told me that it was only a month old, and her old man, who'd been killed by the Huns, had paid £3 for it. She wasn't going to let it go for anything less. I explained that I only had a couple of quid to my name, but I'd be willing to pay off the rest before 6 months were up. "We could all be dead in 6 months, she replied. "Then I'll let you have 2 quid and 6pence, with my grandpa's barrow thrown in," I said without thinking. "Who's your grandpa?" "Charlie Trumper," I told her with pride, though, if the truth be known, I hadn't expected her to have heard of him. "Charlie Trumper? Then 2 quid and 6pence will do just fine for now, young'un, and so you pay the rest back before Christmas." That was the first time I discovered what the word reputation meant. We shook hands on the deal, and I grabbed the handles and began to push my first cock sparrow back over the bridge towards the Whitechapel Road. By the time I was in sight of Grandpa's pitch, my grin already stretched from ear to ear. The crowd around the old fellow's barrow seemed larger than usual, and I couldn't work out why there was such a hush the moment I showed up. "There's young Charlie," shouted a voice, and the crowd quickly stood aside. Grandpa was lying on the pavement, his face as white as a sheet. I ran to his side and fell on my knees. "It's Charlie, Grandpa! It's me! I'm here!" I cried. His tired eyelids blinked slowly. "Listen to me careful, lad," he said, between gasps of breath. "The barrow now belongs to you, so never let it or the pitch out of your sight for more than a few hours at a time." "But it's your barrow and your pitch, Grandpa. How will you work without a barrow and a pitch?" I asked. But he was no longer listening. Until that moment, I never realized anyone I knew could die. It was to be weeks before young Charlie would stop turning his head to ask, "How many, Grandpa? How much, Grandpa?" For the first few months, Charlie and his sisters earned only a few pennies a week between them, and Sal begged Charlie to sell Grandpa's old barrow to raise another pound, but Charlie's reply was always the same, "Never," before adding that he'd rather starve than let another hand wheel it away. Soon business began to look up, and the biggest barrow in the world even returned enough of a profit to allow Sal to buy a second-hand dress, Kitty a pair of shoes, and Charlie a third-hand suit. Grace was in France, in the hospital tents. As the months passed, Charlie became more and more aware of his customers' needs, and felt things were on the up when Mrs. Smelly appeared to buy more potatoes for her boarding house in one morning than he would normally have hoped to sell a regular customer in a month. "I could deliver your order, Mrs. Smelly, you know," he said, raising his cap. "Then you wouldn't have to come out in all weathers." "Well, I'll give it a go for a couple of weeks," she said. "But if you ever let me down, Charlie Trumper—" From that day, Mrs. Smelly was never seen shopping for fruit or vegetables in the market again. Charlie decided that he should extend his delivery service to other customers. He gave Grandpa's old barrow a lick of paint, and put Kitty onto house-to-house calls taking orders while he remained on his pitch. Kitty, it turned out, had no head for figures. By the end of that month, Charlie was almost wiped out and unable to pay the rent. "So what you learned, Charlie?" asked Dan Salmon. "Think twice before you employ members of your own family, and never assume that anyone will pay their debts." "Good, good," said Mr. Salmon. "You learn fast. So how much you need to clear rent and see yourself past next month?" £5, said Charlie, lowering his head. On Friday night, Dan Salmon handed over 5 sovereigns to Charlie, along with several wafers of mozzas. "Pay back when possible, boy chick, and don't ever tell the missus, or we both end up in big trouble." Charlie paid back his loan at a rate of 5 shillings a week, and 20 weeks later he'd returned the full amount. He would always remember handing over the final payment, because it was on the same day as the first big aeroplane raid over London, and he spent most of that night hiding under his father's bed, with both Sal and Kitty clinging on to him for dear life. The following morning, Charlie learned that over 100 Londoners had been killed, and some 400 injured in the raid. Monday afternoon, Charlie was sticking a fork into his third of a pork pie, when he heard a knock on the door. Kitty left the table, only to return a moment later. "Is that Becky Salmon? Says she desires to have a word with you." "Oh, does she now? Well, you better show Miss Salmon into the parlour," said Charlie with a grin. He got up and strolled into the only other room that wasn't a bedroom. He lowered himself into an old leather chair, and a moment later, Posh Porky marched in. Charlie stared at her gleaming white blouse and dark blue pleated skirt. Her smart blue school blazer sported a golden eagle, and a red ribbon sat uneasily in her short dark hair. He ordered Kitty to leave them alone. She left without another word. "So, what do you want?" asked Charlie. "I've come to see you because of what has happened to my parents." She enunciated each word without any trace of an East End accent. "So, what has happened to your parents?" Becky burst into tears. "Dada was killed in the raid, and Mummy's been taken to the London hospital, and—" She stopped abruptly, adding no further explanation. Charlie jumped out of his chair. "No one told me," he said. "I haven't even told the assistants at the shop yet. Do you want me to tell them? Is that why you came round?" "No," she said. "I want you to take over the shop." Charlie was so stunned he made no attempt to reply. "My father always considered that you were as good as old Grandpa, Charlie, and everyone knows he was the best. But what about me barrow? It's only a few yards away from the shop, so you could easily keep an eye on both, unlike your delivery service." "What, you knew about that?" "My father and I had no secrets." "So, how would it work?" asked Charlie, beginning to feel he was a yard behind the girl. "You run the barrow